Okay. It's tier list time. So, this is going to look, the top end is going to look considerably different than it has before. I've had a lot of time to think, and I've been watching a lot of tournament matches, and there's a big shakeup in the top tier and also in the 2 tiers below it. So, let's get into this. Splash and Machine, they are both at least a little bit weaker than they were at launch, but they are still the best weapons in the game. And it's not close. The Splash, the thing about the Splash, and there's going to be a theme here. The Splash is the best, like, aggressive pushing weapon of, you know, on the top tier here, but it's not a super aggressive weapon. It's a weapon that wants occasionally to be able to drop back and use its grab tank. It's a weapon that wants to be using burst bombs. People are not finding success running like QR Splash right now. It's a little bit more jack of all trades right now. And that means that there's a little bit of a hole right now in the meta team comp. Like if you're trying to think of like the most ideal team comp that you could come up with, the thing that's missing is pushing power here. There aren't a lot of weapons that really give you that in the top tier right now. Part of that is because of main weapons, and part of that is because of special weapons. Retake is difficult at the moment. There are only so many specials that you want to use to get in against an enemy team and retake. So to kind of clarify terms for a second, because I'm going to be using this for like the rest of the tier list probably. A retake is a situation where you have like lost a fight, you know, given the enemy team a disadvantage, and you have to get back to the objective and regain control of it so they stop scoring. That's the, you know, most important situation really for your team comp to be able to work. That's where your weapons really need to carry you forward, because you're going to be in just like a 4v4 fight against the other team, and the other team has already got map control, so what can your weapons provide? What X factor are they going to give you that's going to let you get back in? And Booyah Bomb is one of the best retake specials in the game and has been for a long time. Like, Booyah Bomb was on even footing with stuff like Armor and Missiles and Stingray in Splatoon 2. Like, people could run Booyah Bombs, and they would get value out of it, even when those other 3 specials were in the game. And those 3 specials were busted. Those 3 specials were better than anything that's in this game, or has ever been in this game. I mean, I guess missiles are worse in this game, so it's still like that. Booyah Bomb, really good retake. But the problem is that the machine is not a great pushing weapon, and it can't really get in there. Its job is to, like, be in the way. It's a zoning tool. So what do you use to push in? Well, you could use a Splash. Splash is a really good, you know, aggressive weapon, good accuracy, fast kill time, has a burst bomb so that it can do chip damage stuff. And that's great. The thing is, if it actually has to push in and fight something with the main weapon is fairly mediocre compared to other weapons that are designed well for fighting. The main weapon of the Splash versus the main weapon of the 52 should probably win. Main weapon of the Splash versus like a Tri-Slosher versus like a Carbon especially versus a Tetra Dualies should probably lose. Should probably lose against a Wiper even. And the Wiper as a main weapon is significantly weaker for combat specifically than those options that I've discussed there. There are definitely things that beat this in a 1v1 fight, again, if we're only looking at the main weapon. The way that FLC describes this is you're typically going to have a core of players who are going to sit back and cover one side or another, and then you're going to have a couple players who are going to push up. So it's this kind of formation right here, this sort of like square or U shape or something. And the way that FLC describes it in a stream that he did recently is you can put a splash here and you can put a splash here, but you can't put a splash here and a splash here. Putting splashes in these two positions doesn't work, because what's going to happen is at some point one of them is going to want to pop a crab tank. And when one of them wants to pop a crab tank, they're not going to be holding this kind of a position anymore, because you don't crab tank and become the furthest player forward on the team. That's how you get like a whole ton of crap thrown at you and get swarmed, and the crab tank goes down. Crab tank is not like an invulnerable special or anything. There are a lot of ways to counter it, and people have had a lot of practice countering it. So when you crab tank, if you're too far forward, you're just going to get blown up. So the way that you run double splash, if you're going to run it, is you have one player who's here to crab tank, and then the other splash is pushing up. And then they switch places. This one goes back to crab tank, and this one goes forward to play forward when the crab tank gets used. That dynamic is really strong, but what do you put here if you're not going to put a splash here? So, Machine is a common answer to that question, but Machine is not a very strong pushing weapon, and having a Machine fill that role means that this comp is still relatively slow to push up. The team is going to be pretty slow to push up if all you've got is like a splash and a Machine. Because the way that team comps have generally been built in the previous patch is you're probably going to have some number of splashes and machines, and that's going to be 3 of your weapons. And then the last weapon was very likely to be a Splatana Stamper. And so all of the weapons could just chip damage off each other, and they didn't need to push up as aggressively. But what's shaken up the top tier now is that we have Ballpoint here. Ballpoint is nuts at the moment. We're seeing comps almost universally have Ballpoint across the board at top level. The thing about Ballpoint is that it's just a better main weapon than most of the weapons in the game. It's like, it's a little bit like the Tetras in that regard, that like, you've got to be really careful what kind of kit you give this thing, because if you give it too good of a kit, people are going to run 2 of them, and it's going to work. When it was released, there were people who ran double or even triple Ballpoint at the LAN event right after it released, before they could patch it or anything. This main weapon absolutely goes off. And the reason that it's been down lower up until this point is that Inkjet has not been a very enticing option. People have preferred something like the Heavy, which is going to give you a Wave Breaker, which is going to be pretty good consistent value. That's really useful to have on a backline weapon. And it's still able to go up and play fairly aggressively. The thing is, though, Inkjet got buffed, and we're also in a situation in the metagame where retaking is really hard, where we don't have a lot of great specials for doing that. We'll talk about this guy later with Tri-Strike and everything, because Tri-Strike is one of the options that people have been looking to. People would love for Tri-Strike to be what missiles were in Splatoon 2. People would love to be able to grab a K-shot and, you know, paint for missiles, fire the missiles, and then be able to run forward with those missiles and engage with those missiles. That's what people are looking for when they pick weapons like these. They're looking for what the K-shot was in Splatoon 2. Or you could even say what the N-Zap 85 was, because this is a lot more of a support weapon. But I think that, you know, that has been somewhat overrated, the ability to do that. As someone who is a K-shot player, as someone who has played a lot of this weapon, as someone who picked this up, tried it a little bit, and immediately went, ew, this does not feel right. I don't feel like I'm getting value out of this. I think that right now, it is actually possibly a better option to run a Ballpoint and use the Inkjet. Inkjet's height lets it get into positions that it wasn't able to get into before, and it also makes it a lot harder to shoot down. Granted, if you run into an E-liter, you're still going to need to be very careful about that, and it's really scuffed, but it's good enough right now in an environment where retake specials are bad enough right now that Inkjet isn't actually that bad of an option, and the main weapon carries this thing so hard that you look at this and you go, you know what? this is worth running an inkjet weapon for. And so a lot of the time right now, people are actually using that inkjet to retake. For example, you look at Hagglefish, and what basically every team ever is doing right now is when they're trying to get from this side over to this side, which is the central problem of the neutral game on Hagglefish. They're gonna have a ballpoint here anyway, because this is already where the ballpoint wants to be. Well, this stuff right here is really, really nice to put an inkjet over the top of. You use the first jump of the inkjet to get up to here, you use the second jump to get up to here. Now you're up in the stratosphere, and you're still able to hit stuff down over this wall, and unless there's an E-leader right here, you're gonna be able to just clear their entire team back. And in the meantime, while this is happening, you know, you've got this area flushed out. This is where you run people in through the middle, and now they're gonna get some picks, and now they're gonna force the enemy team backward. And so there are enough little plays like that that you can make on the maps that are making it so that this can legitimately play into the game plan for using specials that top teams are able to put together. So this may be an overreaction, because everyone is running it right now. And another thing that everyone is running right now is this thing, which I think is trash, compared to any of the options above it. Like, I think it is being generous to put it in the playable tier right now. I legitimately think if you're a top team, if you're a team that is hand-picking your members and trying to pick the weapons that you're going to win with, I don't think these two should factor into the comp. Now, that said, I think these are good transitional weapons to get yourself, you know, from one metagame to another. And these are weapons where if you're solo maining them, you're going to be fine because they're always going to be okay enough that you can run them. And that's why I feel like they're in a good spot. But if you're just trying to build a team right now from scratch that is going to win tournaments consistently, and you're putting the best players in the world on it that can learn any weapon they want, I don't think you pick these. I think that you pick something else if you're looking for retake capabilities, and that Ballpoint is something that can help with that. Another thing about Ballpoint is that there's a lot that hasn't really been explored and figured out except by top-level players on this thing. The ability for this thing to fight and paint at short range is absurd. The amount of paint that this puts out makes it so that running this is a silly idea, because this thing still just paints a lot with its short-range weapon, but it can also sustain a much longer range fire that does a lot more DPS, and it has a retake special, and it has a fizzy bomb that it can actually use for things like damage combos, for things like moving around the map, for times where it doesn't have charge and needs to be able to poke at long range. Because one of the challenges with this weapon is that, like, you don't get the long-range fire right away. You have to transition into it. So if there's someone at more than your max range, we'll go and show this off real quick. You'll notice that the first shots I'm firing are going to be short range, and then it transitions over. If I need to hit someone that's, you know, that far away, Fizzy Bomb is going to be a better way of doing that, so that I don't have to, like, stand still charging it. And I can just get that damage out and then move on with my life and actually get the charge ready over here or something. So there are definitely ways to use the Fizzy Bomb. It's awkward to use any kind of bomb with this thing, and that's why something like beacons are actually really good with Ballpoint, because it doesn't want to be using its sub-weapon that much. But it does get some value out of them. I saw a really, really sick play where a Ballpoint was cornered around the wall of Inkblot. And before the player got around the corner, they dropped a fizzy at their feet and then just got enough charge to do the mini shots like this. And that was enough to get the splat. Because this does 50, they move into that damage as they come around the corner, and then all you need is 2 mini shots, and they're down. That kind of thing is actually really dangerous at short range. Like, this is a weapon that you can't just carelessly push in against as a frontline weapon. But it also has an impact from long range, and it also has retake capability. Very, very versatile weapon, and I gotta say, if there's gonna be a weapon that's top tier, I don't mind this one being top tier. I mind it if it becomes a situation where we need to run 2 or 3 of them again, but I think that this is fine. I think that this is a cool weapon. And it's something that any backline weapon user should seriously be considering running right now, because it is all that I'm seeing at top level. Ballpoint is low-key better than some short-range weapons in short range. True. Like, the DPS of your short-range shots, if I am informed correctly, is the second highest DPS you can get in the game, followed only by the Hydra. Gem, can you put the Naut in top tier for 1 second so I can take a screenshot and send propaganda to my team? Okay, one sec. I got you. Okay, there you go. Here's the list. So let's talk about the next tier down. Stamper still is really, really strong. And it still synergizes really, really well with these two weapons, which is another reason for it to be strong. It's strong by itself, but it's also strong because it goes so well with these. And you're still going to see tons and tons of Stampers. It's still a top-tier choice. It's still really good. Problem is, when we go back and we talk about this kind of formation, where we've got two people pushing forward, making this U-shape thing. One of these slots is now going to be a ballpoint. So there are fewer slots that you can put a Stamper into on a team. I'm seeing some teams that are actually running like Stamper and then two kind of frontline like this. I'm not sure how I feel about that because I'm not sure that's enough pushing power. I've got a video out about how you really need to have pushing power on a team. Like, it is very important to have weapons that can take space and not just keep other people out of it, because really, really defensive team comps don't have very reliable ways of scoring points. They have ways of denying the other team points, but it is not a defense wins championships kind of deal. This is a very aggressive game. You've got to push your way forward and take space for every fight that you win. If you win if you win a fight defensively, but then you aren't able to take very much space going towards mid, you basically haven't won that fight, because space is what matters, not necessarily exactly winning the fight. Stamper is becoming more difficult to run just because there are so many weapons that are competing for the slot of anchor or pseudo-anchor. You really don't want to run like a Nautilus plus a ballpoint. You really don't want to run like a Stamper plus a Flingza, because you're just losing out on too much pushing power. And so I'm putting Stamper the slightest bit down, not because it's any worse, but because the weapons that you do want to run are making it more difficult to run on a team comp. Next, we've got Tetras and Wiper, and Tetras and Wiper do very similar things, and so they've been compared a lot and, you know, debated and discussed and everything. I have maintained and still maintain that I think Tetras are slightly better, but they're both definitely very viable options right now. Everything in the patch only helped both of them. Both of their specials got buffs. And this is a metagame where teams are struggling to be able to push. Well, these are weapons that really love to push, and they take a lot of space, and they push the enemy team back. And they feed, and then when they jump back in, their team was still able to hold the space that they pushed into, and so they took space regardless of the fact that they went in and died. These are the quintessential quick respawn weapons. These are the ones that, if you're going to go in and die a lot, these are the ones that you want to be picking. And that's, you know, one of the premier ways to take space in the game right now. If you run one of these alongside a Splash, that's great synergy, because the Splash is going to paint well for it. The Splash is going to be able to follow up on the fights it starts. But also, the Splash is going to get the opportunity to drop back, and you're not going to lose your entire front line because you've still got one of these going in and drawing aggro and stuff. So really, really good synergy there. And these are also a couple of the better weapons at rushing down something like a machine, especially the Tetras. The Tetra's matchup against Machine is really good because the Machine is super immobile and doesn't do very fast DPS. So even though the Tetra's DPS isn't great, it's still better. It's good enough that you can get in there and actually dive on one of those things and get them out of the way. And that was one of the ways that a lot of teams decided to handle Machine when Machine was solely at the top tier, when the Machine was considered to be the very best weapon in the game, before we had really experimented enough with Crab Tank to figure out how busted that thing was. Wiper, the reservation that I have with it, because it is extremely mobile, it's really, really good at kiting, And it got big buffs to the Ultra Stamp. Ultra Stamp has really had a glow up recently. That's not to say that it's great, but it's definitely better. It's kind of the same situation as Inkjet. Inkjet's not a great special, but you put it on a weapon like this and buff it up enough, and this thing is going to pop off. Torpedo, I mean, it's good for damage combos. It's not something you're going to use all that often in terms of like trying to get people to shoot at things, but it is a poking tool, if not the best one in the game. But the main weapon kind of hard carries because it's just so mobile and hits from long enough away that it's really difficult for a frontliner to deal with. Now, the reason that I put the Tetras up above this one is that the DPS on this is really weak. You don't splat very quickly with it. And with the Tetras, you do splat decently quickly. Not super fast, but decently quickly. This requires you to be able to move and kind of kite people around to be able to get your damage. And that's not as strong of a thing to have to do in this game. Now, having the one-shot definitely helps, because if you're able to sneak up on people, you're able to do roller things, and then if you need to kite back, then you can kite back. The Dualie Squelchers are way down here, because they can only kite back. And kiting back often in this game means giving up space, which is the opposite of what these weapons are supposed to be doing. So I still think Tetras are the superior choice, but there are definitely use cases where you would want one over the other. And they're both very solid options. We're seeing both of them at top levels of play. You look at something like Graveyard Shift, they've got one-trick Tetras, they're going to run those. But you're also seeing people put a lot of top players on the Wiper. So both valid options there. And that's where I think the top tier is at right now. I think if you form teams out of nothing but these 6 weapons, you can't go too far wrong. Now, there are some reasonable alternatives. There are some things where maybe in niche situations, maybe given the skill set of the players, these things can totally be worth it. For example, if you've got Kyo on your team, Kyo is a very, very good bucket player. And you've got a lot of good reasons to want to put Kyo on the feed bucket here. So, like, these are places where maybe an individual player at top level will have a certain skill set that enables them to perform on these things as well as you will on a top-tier weapon. So there are lots of good use cases, and these also will factor into certain play styles if you want. For example, this guy right here is going to combo really well with the Tetras because they can dive together. If you've got a very high paint comp, then you can enable this carbon roller to pop off, and there are certain map modes where that's going to be really strong. If you want missiles, you run this thing. So there are definitely a lot of good use cases and a lot of good reasons to run one of these. I just think that they're a little bit more situational than the options above. That these you're never complaining about having as long as you're constructing a team comp reasonably. These you're maybe going to struggle a little bit more to fit them in some of the time. So, Flingza. The big nerf to missiles made it so that it's difficult to run those, because even though missiles are still the best special in the game, they didn't get put on weapons that have especially great kits. And so, if you're running this as a pseudo-anchor. You're running this to farm the missiles and use those missiles to get the rest of your team in. Thing is, you're competing with the ballpoint for that position, and the main weapon of the Flingza is not quite as good. Main weapon of the Flingza is still phenomenal. It's a weapon that can play paint support, has decent range, and also can go in and make sharking or aggressive plays when it needs to. It's very versatile. It's very flexible. It can do a lot of the things that it needs to do. But this weapon has more range, has a, really fast kill time. Aside from the inability to one-shot, it's just better in combat in every way. It's, if anything, more mobile, because you can always, drop your shots and just swim whenever you want, whereas this thing is going to get locked into its swings more often, and its swings are going to take a bit of time, which, I mean, there's charge time for sure, and this also has a sub-weapon that's better for poking. So, the advantages start to stack up over it, and it's this is not a bad weapon at all. This is something I would be happy to run on a team. It's just not better than the ballpoint, and so you're not going to see it very much at top level at all anymore. If ballpoint and maybe Stamper weren't in the game, this would absolutely be a top tier weapon. All it takes is less competition, and it's better than all of a lot of the stuff around it. But it's getting forced down by the fact that there are so many good options for that kind of anchor slot, for that sort of anchor role, or pseudo-anchor, because I wouldn't call a Nautilus an anchor, but it definitely makes it so that you don't want to be playing an anchor, and it's going to anchor a little bit. So that's where my term pseudo-anchor comes from. It's competing with that slot for that slot with too many other good weapons. Because there might be a time you want to run a heavy, there might be a time you want to run a stamper, there might be a time you want to run a ballpoint, might be a time you want to run a Nautilus or an E-leader. And like all of those weapons are kind of competing for the same slot on a team, even though they do very different things. Like, it's just too few slots for too many weapons, and you're not going to see it as often. Heavy, like I said, this is another one of those weapons that's competing for those same slots. This is a weapon where, like, you want to be able to run it, but also you've got all of these other choices, and with Ballpoint popping off as much as it is, the Splatling players should probably be leaning more in this direction, unless they specifically need a wave breaker on that team for whatever reason. So that's where I'm at with that. Not too much more to say with that. Sprinkler is, you know, good for farming the wave breaker, but it's not going to be anywhere near as good as the Fizzy will be. So, yeah, lots of... it's good defensively in some cases. Like, you can throw it at your feet, use it to block shots. But also, like I mentioned earlier, you can just drop that Fizzy at your feet, and it's doing the same thing that a bomb does. Doing a little bit of chip damage, letting you get those really, really fast early shots off with the short-range mode. So... I would just prefer a Ballpoint, I would think, for those situations if I'm practiced on both. 52 Gal is another serious consideration that you have to make for pushing weapon. The thing with the 52 Gal is that it has a niche in between the Splash and something like the Tetras. The Splash is very paint positive and very, like, very capable of disengaging. And it has a special that it's willing to play around if it doesn't want to push in. That's something that you need to have if you're going to play a shooter this short-ranged. It's going to lose certain matchups against, like, midline weapons, and it's going to get zoned out. You know, you can't just push in against a machine with the main weapon of a Splash by itself. Now, the Burst Bomb makes it significantly better at being able to threaten this kind of a thing, but the main weapon can't really do that by itself. The main weapon of the 52, in some cases, can just get on top of this machine and make it dead. And the wall can kind of help it do that too. But it also doesn't have the raw pushing power that the Tetras do, because it has to play around a wall. It can't play especially fast, because wall is just not a fundamentally fast sub-weapon to have. It can keep you safe in some situations where it would be more dangerous, and you can use the special weapon Ink Tank Reset to be able to throw a wall, then pop Whale, and then throw a second wall. And that Whale is actually going to synergize really well with you getting into that advanced position and then using this relatively long-range weapon to start firing shots. Like, you've got some ability to work your way forward, which is why this is so much higher than the 96. Because the 96 really doesn't have a way to push you out of the way. It can only really hold its ground, and if someone really wants the 96 dead, they can go in and make that happen, whereas the machine makes that a lot more difficult with the combination of being able to spam fizzies and big hitboxes and the Booyah armor that it's going to get that will help its team move in, but also displace the people who are trying to move in on it. Something that FLC talks about a lot with this weapon is the concept of continuation. That is, you get into an advanced position, and then you pop this special, and popping that special lets you get into an even more advanced position. Continuation is something that the 52 Gal has as well. You get a pick, you're able to pop that special and push forward to get another pick. It's not really the same way with something like a Tri-Strike, where if you get a pick, then cool, you can throw the Tri-Strike, but they're probably just not going to get impacted by the Tri-Strike very much. It's not going to move any one player too much, and a lot of the time, even if you focus all three strikes on a single player, that player can actually just splat you while you're trying to use the strikes or something. So you have to use this from really far back, and it doesn't have quite the range for it to be as global a special as something like a Whale or a Booyah Bomb are. And so it's just not going to be able to get pick, throw special, get another pick, and keep moving forward with the team that way. It's going to have to make the rest of its team do all the work. So this weapon is better at that, but Tetras don't even care if they get the pick. They are still having an impact by charging forward and getting someone to deal with them behind the enemy team. Their team gains space even if this thing just dies. And that's not really quite the same with the 52 because it has to move up a lot more slowly. So it's in a little bit of an awkward position there. And while the wall does synergize pretty well with it, better than maybe most other weapons in the game do, it's still something that slows the weapon down significantly and makes it so that you have to be playing a little bit more deliberately with this thing. You kind of have to design the team around it. DNA, was able to make that happen running double 52. It's definitely a thing that can work. Pairs pretty darn well with a machine because there's a lot of combo potential with something a machine does plus a 52 shot. And they're just good like mid-range weapons that are going to keep you out of their space. So that sort of thing can work pretty well. But it's a little bit awkward to play, and I've been noticing that as I play it myself. This bucket is designed for one thing, and that is murder. Its job is to go in and trade and just create as much, as many favorable trades for its team as it can, and hopefully have a tacticooler as it's going in so that when it does trade, it actually comes out on top of that trade. It is not very good for painting. It's not going to move up especially quickly. It kind of needs to shark around, and if you paint carefully for this thing, it's kind of difficult for it to get in sometimes and get into the positions it likes. Its challenge is definitely not so much getting the fights that or not so much executing on the fights that it takes, it's getting the fights that it wants. Tacticooler is not a huge priority, and oftentimes, in the experience that I've seen, it tends to get used more selfishly than anything on this weapon. Again, because there aren't that many weapons that really want to rush in and feed. Like, if you try to run this thing with a Tetras, where is the paint on your team? Neither of these things paint very well. And it's going to be really hard, especially for the bucket to get in. So you have to be... It definitely dictates a lot of what the team comp has to be if you're going to pick one of those things. But, I mean, we've seen Kyo use it. We know that it can definitely pop off. The trading potential can definitely help snowball things for your team. So if you've got a bucket player who wants to run this thing, that's totally fine. That can definitely work, even at top level. E-Leader has tended to be pretty situational. I can only think that it's going to be more and more valuable the more Ballpoint starts to pop off because it can shoot inkjets out of the sky. And it's one of the, counters to this main weapon. So I have to think that this is still doing okay, but I haven't seen it get used a lot, and so there's not a lot of data for me to work with about why exactly it's being used and why exactly it isn't. It's a little bit more of a passive weapon, and in a game that, means you really need to... that forces you to take space, it's dangerous to run something that's passive. You need to get value out of it, and the value you're going to get is either zone control or picks, and that's all. Because if you're going for either of those two things, you're not going to be painting that much, so you're only going to get so many wave breakers, but wave breaker's pretty nice. So niche, but definitely still a thing that you can run in a number of different situations. Nautilus, also competing for that pseudo anchor thing. I've talked about that a little bit already. And it's, competing. A lot of people who would like to run a Nautilus are probably just going to run a Ballpoint right now because the short range mode is still very, very good. It's not quite as good as, being able to hold your charge forward as a Nautilus, but this thing actually paints, and this thing does not. And this thing has, they both have retake specials, but this thing has a sub-weapon that it can combo with and do stuff with. Point sensor is valuable for information, but, the higher level you get, the less you really need that information because people are just going to have pretty good awareness. So I'd definitely say it's taken a little bit of a hit from this guy being more popular. Carbon Deco is one of the best weapons at making people dead if it gets on top of them. But the problem is it has to get on top of them, and that requires a lot of paint from its team, and that requires a map that enables it to shark and flank and stuff, and there are only so many maps that are like that in the game. So if I see one of these things in capable hands on like Mako-Mart, I'm terrified. Like, this is something that can absolutely just get a quad on your team. But it's also something that can be counterplayed if everyone's painting pretty carefully and using their range and kind of scouting things out ahead of time. Very, you know, niche, but definitely, I think, playable at a fairly high level on certain map modes. I don't know. I feel like this is almost the same kind of thing I'm going to be saying about the Octobrush, but I feel a little bit better just because of the kill time with this thing than I do with the Octobrush, I think. So I'm probably going to keep it there. And then if you want a crab tank and you don't want to run a splash for some reason, you're running this. And that reason had better be that you really need the ability to move through enemy ink. Because this thing can't really dive, like we've talked about, as well as some of the other weapons can, as well as something like a Tetra as a Wiper or a 52 can, or even a... I mean, this isn't exactly for diving, this is for sharking more. So, yeah, those three weapons, basically. This can't dive as well as those can, but at least it has a burst bomb to be able to poke with. This sacrifices that ability to poke, because suction bombs are just straight up worse in this game than burst bombs. Like, I can't think of a reason that I would want a suction bomb over a burst bomb right now, the way that the meta is. So you're sacrificing that ability to poke for the ability to dive. And that's basically what you want it for. And I think this ability to poke and still be able to fight pretty well at short range is probably worth a little bit more than this. So it's just a matter of being outclassed, and you probably want to pick this first. But there are definite use cases for this. For example, again, like we've mentioned before, if you're trying to go in with one of these diving weapons and you need to be able to get through enemy ink. So it's kind of dependent on what you're trying to build the comp around. We'll talk really quickly about V-Shot. The big thing that people don't like about V-Shot, aside again from having a suction bomb, which isn't a great poking tool, is that Trizooka is inconsistent. Trizooka can absolutely pop off, can absolutely open fights up, and it's a very safe long-distance thing that does a lot of damage to Crab Tank. There are a lot of upsides to Trizooka, but it's just not going to get someone every time. And with a retake special, you want something that's going to work every time. Because sometimes you're going to be in a position where, hey, if we get wiped in this fight, we just lose the game. That's a very frequent scenario that you find yourself in competitive Splatoon, because teams are so good at snowballing their advantages. So putting, you know, all your hopes that, like, this player gets someone with their Zuka, or, you know, this also is, you know, fairly high risk, but also fairly high reward. You could get multiple people with this Zuka. And getting that big of a fight win is pretty cool, but it's not worth the loss of the consistency. So I will still absolutely run this thing if someone wants me to. I'm perfectly happy to use it. I love Trizooka, and I think it's a really solid weapon. It's just like, sometimes it doesn't get what you need, and it's really hard to set up to reliably get what you need with it. So I think it's definitely, you know, a solid option for getting picks and starting a push and going in with them, but I think you're going to get a lot more value out of running a splash most of the time. Okay, let's get to these two. These have been a major source of controversy in the competitive scene lately. This is probably like the part of the tier list, if anything, that you're most likely to disagree with, just because so many people are thinking about these right now. I think that these two weapons, they kind of function similarly in that they are both paint-positive shooters that get Tri-Strike and have a bomb. This is a support weapon. This is only a support weapon. That is all that it can capably do. The main weapon, like I've said when I was talking about Splash, the main weapon just straight up loses to this. The main weapon straight up loses to this. It loses to this. It loses to this. It loses to this. Like, there are not a lot of good matchups that just a Splash-o-matic has in the top tier of weapons in this game. It's just kind of short range and not the fastest kill time. Sure, it's fast, but you know, an arrow spray is fast, and that doesn't mean anything for it. it's just like on the low end of combat utility for something that has that short of range. And its short range really hurts it. I like the Splattershot significantly better for its matchup against Tetras, because the extra range makes it so that there are more situations where all I have to do is aim and shoot, and I don't have to be moving toward the Tetras as they're rolling away from me to be able to do damage to them still. That's a huge advantage for the T-Tech over it. The T-Tech also has a Splat Bomb, which is just miles better right now than a Suction Bomb. I would much rather have a Splat Bomb on, like, anything, I think, than a Suction Bomb. Suction Bombs had a huge moment in Splatoon 2 where spamming them with LDE made it really difficult to move through an area at all. And you could just lock down entire maps that way. But with the nerf that they've been given to like their explosion radius, to their damage, their object damage, they just don't have quite the same utility anymore, and there's not as much of a reason to prefer such a slow fuse time over the fast fuse time of the Splat Bomb. The Splat Bomb actually helps you in short-range engagements. The Suction Bomb, it's very niche if it's ever going to do that. There's, like, a really weird case that's happening. A lot of the time, you'll actually see people with Suction Bombs just throw them straight down at their feet and then back up, and that's the way that they're able to use it in combat. It takes so long for the Suction Bomb to explode, and in that time, the opponent will have, like, closed all of the distance toward them. Whereas the Splat Bomb, you can throw at someone's feet and make them move. And that is just not really the way that a Suction Bomb is going to work at a close range engagement that a Splash is going to want to be taking. So the Suction Bomb is a huge weakness for this thing. You would much, much rather have a Burst Bomb for combat, and that's why this thing is here and this thing is here. The other reason is Crab Tank. Tri-Strike is a special that, man, I really want to be just the tiniest bit better, and then all of a sudden, you know, these things skyrocket upward. If you make it, for example, so that you can swim around while throwing them, like you can swim around with a Trizuka, then you can actually, you know, throw Tri-Strikes and then follow up with them. If you can throw Tri-Strikes a little bit further, then that's valuable. If you can throw the Tri-Strikes, I don't know, and they have a little bit more of a delay before they explode, that would actually be better for this weapon, because then it's able to throw the strikes, swim forward, and be on top of the players while the strikes are landing. And that's the way that the K-Shot worked, and that's why the K-Shot was such a high-tier weapon. That it could play like a support, and that was fine, because it was going to have a really solid retake special, that it was going to enable it to be a Slayer for the next 6 seconds when it pushed in. Because these weapons, like I said, you don't really like the main weapons 1v1 against something like a Tetras, against something like a Machine. They just kind of get beat in those 1v1s. Like, they're not the easiest things. You have to wait for your moments. You have to play a little bit defensively before you find a way in. They're just a little bit weak in that regard, but they get to be a Slayer every so often because they use their special. At least that was the hope. That was the way that the K-Shot worked. That was the way that the N-Zap worked in Splatoon 2. You popped that special, and now that gives you enough of an advantage that you can just run at the enemy team, and you're going to be safe doing that. These don't really have that because it takes just a little bit too long to get the Tri-Strikes into play, and they last for just not quite enough time and don't cover quite as big of a radius. It's just like any one of those weaknesses tweaked, and all of a sudden we've got another Kensa Splattershot, and this thing skyrockets. But until you get that sort of capability, I just don't think that these are quite good enough right now to be picked over something like a Splash or a Tetras or even a 52 Gal. And another thing that I want to say about Tri-Strike is that one of the things that makes Tri-Strike as good as it is on these weapons is that they have combos with it. You can throw Bomb, Tri-Strike, 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 Bomb with either one of these two weapons. And that's really cool. That gives you a lot more utility for the special. When you look at other Tri-Strike weapons, and you take a quick look down here, this poor fellow right here, Sprinkler, Tri-Strike, 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 Sprinkler. The second Sprinkler gets rid of the first Sprinkler, but that's okay. Yeah, these are kind of probably the best Tri-Strike representatives you're going to get. The ZekkoFin has the problem that the Tri-Strikes don't have enough range for it to actually really be able to use them well, because it's already going to be at like the very max range from the front line. So if you want to disrupt anything any further back than the front line, and even then all it's going to do is make them take 2 steps backwards and then they're fine, you have to get into a range where it's pretty dangerous to be for a Charger. So I think these are the best Tri-Strike weapons in the game right now, and they're still just not quite cutting it. There needs to be just a little bit more for, I think, Tri-Strike to be as valuable at the top level that you would want to run one of those things. This again comes from having played this weapon extensively and having played this weapon for a little bit after having played this weapon extensively and being like, wow, this feels like it sucks. And that's in part because my playstyle is more of the K-shot kind of playstyle where I want to be going in and playing aggressively, and this is just not as good at doing that. If you were like an N-Zap 85 main from Splatoon 2, this is a much better fit for you than this is, because this is going to do a lot more of the paint a lot, throw bomb, paint a lot, throw bomb, get special, and then maybe try to do something with that special kind of idea. This is much more of a support. If you're going to try and play like a hard support weapon right now, this is probably the one you're looking at. Again, focusing purely on paint support and not focusing on being able to fight is not something that I think is generally super valuable. You want something that can do multiple of those things to really get value, or if you're going to be playing something specifically to spam for the special, it better be one of the top 3 specials in the game, and Tri-Strike I don't think is it. So let's move on from there. Let's talk about Squeezer. Squeezer is in a really awkward place where it is one of the best main weapons that has ever been put in Splatoon. This thing is stupid, but they gave it a wall, which does not do a lot for it. It already had a lot of range, so it didn't really have to worry about getting rushed down by something like a Tetras or a Wiper before, it could get shots in. And it would really, really like a bomb to be able to force you out of position, to be able to poke from safe distances, and it just doesn't have that, so it's forced to really hard rely on the main weapon. And if it throws the wall out, now it can't move too far forward past that wall, so it has to play a lot more defensively than this weapon generally does have to play. Like the foil Squeezer from Splatoon 2 was a very aggressive weapon. It got up in your face and used bubbles if it had to force its way through the enemy team. This thing could frontline when it was in Splatoon 2 and it had Splat Bomb plus Bubble Blower. Not so much now. Now it's kind of... They got the idea that this weapon is supposed to be this like really long range shooter that just kind of walls people out, but it's not a super high amount of damage for being able to do that. It's got really solid range and a very good kill time for the distance that it's got, but also you're just not getting as much of a push out of it. It's much more of a defensive weapon, and its versatility was something that made it really strong in Splatoon 2. It doesn't really have that so much anymore. If you're trying to run a Zuka, you're going to run this or the shot. I would probably prefer the shot personally, but maybe there are some times in a team comp where it makes more sense to have this kind of midline weapon in it. Still, for walling people out, which is what this weapon seems to be designed to want to do, that's what the machine does. And that's what the machine does better than anything else in the game. The 96 Gal, with the wall, also fits into that sort of archetype. But we don't see that on the screen right now. That's because I have to scroll further down to get to it. And so we'll move on. Brush. Brush is in a pretty solid place. If you're, an ink brush main, you're not complaining too much. People can definitely build a comp around you. You're going to be able to distract. You're going to be able to throw a bunch of bombs. And the whale it's got some pretty good synergy with this weapon. Because you can run around and get multiple different angles on it. The problem with any of the sharking weapons is just that they have a really hard time getting in because there are not a lot of maps where you can flank. This weapon is in a pretty good spot because it's so mobile and it can run around and distract people and pull them in the wrong directions, but it can only pull them so far in the wrong directions because the maps are hallways. If the maps in this game were just wider, if they were less rectangles and more squares, this brush would be, I think, at least a tier up. I think it would be significantly stronger, but it just doesn't have as many places to run away to, as many places to draw people around to. So it doesn't get to use quite as much of its running around freely as you'd like it to be able to do, and as much of its sharking capability. Slosher, I frankly don't see why you run this over a T-Tech right now. It's just not got as much paint. if you're trying to use it for mid-range zoning pressure, the machine is right here, and it has a significantly better retake special, and its bomb is also very good for it. So it's just kind of outclassed in that regard. So you would be running this specifically because you wanted Tri-Strike, and if you specifically want Tri-Strike, you're probably just going to run it on a short-range shooter that gets it faster. So yeah, I don't think it really has niche right now. It's still not bad. It's just there are those other options, and so it's kind of outclassed. Squiffer, if you're a god with it, you can make it work at top level, but it's like you're making it work, and you're probably building a team around it, and it's really hard to get up to that level of skill to where this thing is really going to pop off for you, because you really need to splat people with it. The kit is doing it no favors. The kit is not something that's really helping the team. If you can't use that kit to get splats with the main weapon, pick something else. Unlike other chargers, it's not the sort of thing where you can use this as a zoning tool. You can't just point the laser at people and get them to move and like make use of that because it's got too short of range. You need to actually just hit shots if you're going to play with this thing. This is a huge like skill check kind of weapon. All right, Octobrush. Octobrush has a few top level representatives. Chara has played it before. You've got Red Shell, who's able to play it at like this like DivX or very near at least DivX level. I think they've gotten to DivX at this point. So I seem to remember them playing pretty close against Seafoam. Very, very solid players there, and there's also a top-level Japanese representative whose name eludes me. And you really have to learn how to play specifically the Octobrush to play this thing. There's not a lot that carries over for any other weapon in the game into this. One of the things that you need to make very good use of is its ability to hit up over ledges. If you get this thing, for example, on top of the stacks, on top of Inkblot, you can hit in all four directions around the stacks there and rain down on people with damage that's going to kill fast enough that they have to respect it. And so you play elusively so that they don't know where you're going to pop up from, and then all of a sudden lethal damage comes from entirely too long of a range away, and you have to play really safe to fight against this thing. Plus, it is one of the better Zipcaster users, although if you're running something for Zipcaster, the Stamper is right here. So there are like a few map modes where Chara will actually switch over to the Octobrush because he likes it better than the Stamper, at least last I checked. But for the most part, if you're running it for Zipcaster, you're probably running this. So this is a very kind of specialist's weapon. Explo. Explo is not a bad choice, just not better than Ballpoint in the vast majority of cases. There are some places where you can run it at top level, and then there are some places where you really don't want to run it. It's very immobile. You need to run it with probably a certain amount of chip. It's probably going to be doing a lot of painting for you, and that's about the most that it's going to be doing. But it does get a really solid retake special in the Inkstorm, so you can't complain too much about that. It's just a little bit on the slow side. So it's definitely like on the cusp, but not something that I would see, top level players going to all that often. Hydra, I think, again, being slow in this game is just really difficult to work with. If you're going to build a comp around a Hydra, you can definitely do it. It gets one of the best specials in the game. It has really long range. It's one of the few weapons where, like, if it gets into a 1v3, I don't know who's winning that 1v3. It does have some strengths, but when people know how to counterplay a Hydra, it feels like the Hydra doesn't get to play the game. Whereas a Ballpoint is more mobile, has a lot more options from close range. There are times where you catch a Hydra and it doesn't have charge and it's just stuck. When you catch a Ballpoint, it's just going to have its short-range shots ready to go. So it's sacrificing a little bit in terms of firepower, but this is sacrificing a lot in terms of mobility, and I think that that's an unequal trade. I think that Splatling players are generally going to want to be looking at this, and that is generally what I've been seeing Devi do. I've been seeing Devi play a lot of Ballpoint and a lot of Heavy recently, despite the fact that she is primarily a Hydra player. V-Blaster, I would love for it to work. I really would. I would love to be able to say that this is, a great Slayer option. Problem is, every time I run it, it completely forces my team into painting roles so that I am able to have my fun and play my blaster. There are, times where it's great, having a big bubbler on tower with that thing, not a bad thing to have. The sub-weapon works really well with it because it lets you scope out where people are sharking since you can't paint for yourself very well to find them yourself. There's a lot of strengths to it, just the paint output really puts a drain on the team, and it's difficult to justify. Range Blaster, I feel like I should be putting this a little bit higher. I'd probably put it like hereabouts. Range Blaster, you see it work occasionally at top level, mostly in Japan. And typically it's, this player is just going to hit directs. If they get in range, they're going to hit the direct. And that's how that weapon works. Because indirects, you know, people are probably going to be able to move around and get away from a lot more of the time. People are just too mobile. They're too technically skilled. And this weapon is really slow. And as soon as you've revealed yourself to the enemy team and you haven't splatted someone, it's really easy to kind of rush this down, paint its feet, get it into a difficult position. But it's got a pretty solid kit. And I don't know. It's getting moved out of its spot a lot by the Stamper, which works a lot better at like close range, but also has longer range and also has, you know, the same kind of chip damage potential. So it's not really that much of a contest. Like most of the Range Blaster players that I'm seeing are switching off onto Stamper instead, even though this is a very hard weapon to learn. ZekkoFin we already talked about a little bit. The special is a bit of a mismatch with it in that it needs to be playing from a little bit too far back to get a lot of value out of the strikes. The strikes need to be initiated close enough to the enemy team that they can push the enemy team around. The strikes that the ZekkoFin is likely to get, a lot of the time, they're gonna be far enough away that the enemy team can just take like 2 steps back and then just take 2 steps forward again once they're done. And the strikes don't do much. If the ZekkoFin wants to get close enough to have full impact with them, they run the risk that they're moving into range of the enemy players. And so it's a little bit awkward to try and use those here, and that's why I put it down a little bit. But it is still a one-shot charger, and if you really need that kind of like displacement tool, if you're looking for something a little bit more aggressive than a wave breaker, I could see it being used, just not very often, and probably not that much at top level either. Everyone's saying that Pro Char is in YouTube chat. Oh, there. Surprised you have Blaster that high compared to range. I definitely think range is better. I don't know why I had them flipped earlier. I definitely don't agree with that. I don't know. I still think that the Blaster, its biggest problem is more that it drags its team down than that it's that bad on its own as a Slayer weapon. Because I think it absolutely can push people. It's just really hard to justify how much it's bringing away from its team to do that. That the Big Bubbler isn't as valuable of a tool right now, and that the paint that it's going to output just isn't enough to support the team. It's too selfish a weapon, I think. Whereas Range Blaster, I feel, gets in trouble when it tries to push up a little bit more. So that's kind of where I'm at on them. I also do think that like this tier might span like the widest gulf in capability. Like I could see top teams running a shot, right? Running like a Zimmy or something. I'd probably put this a little bit lower, honestly. Running something like a Zimmy is not something I've seen in a good long time at this point. So it might be that like there's just a lot in between here and here. That's how I feel about that. Okay, Rapid Deco. Rapid Deco gets Inkjet, which, like we've talked about, is nice, and it gets the Torpedo, which is amazing for the Rapid. The combo that you get by rolling the Torpedo into a direct is something that allows this weapon to sometimes get out of scraps at short range that it wouldn't have been able to otherwise, especially the better a shot you are with this thing, the more aggressively you're able to play it, because you can get out of those situations pretty reliably. So super duper fun. Love this weapon to death. But Ballpoint exists. You don't want to run double Inkjet in most cases. And if you're going to go for an Inkjet weapon, you're going to pick the Ballpoint. It paints better, has longer range, still has a really, really good kill time as opposed to the relatively low DPS the Rapid has. It's just like the value that you get out of the blaster shot compared to everything else the Ballpoint is giving you, it's just not really equal. And Fizzy Bomb is also a better bomb. So, like, Rapid Deco would love to have a Fizzy Bomb. Oh my goodness, it would love that. So, yeah, I love it to death. It's my baby. It's probably down here, though. Okay, L3D, right? Yeah, L3D. This doesn't look like a D, but it's the L3D. Anyway, L3D has Burst Bomb, which is great for it, and Hammer, which is aggressively mediocre. It's not the worst in terms of its ability to take fights, because it has decent range with its shots, and being able to combo those with Burst Bombs is a huge deal. It's just like picking it for that pretty solid main weapon sub combo and getting an Ultra Stamp for it. There's not quite enough value there. If it got even something like an Inkjet, I could see putting this up a little bit higher within its tier, or even maybe up a tier from there. There might be a use case there, but it doesn't really have it. And also, this is a really hard weapon to learn, because hitting L3 shots is not the easiest thing in the world. So I've got it down hereabouts. Try with Inkjet is something that we've seen very occasionally at top level, but one of the challenges with it is that right now what you want to be able to do is use the Inkjet as a retake special, which means that you want other people pushing up while the special is going out. But the Tri-Slosher is one of the weapons that would be pushing up. So you're taking one of your frontline weapons and putting them on retake special duty instead of putting them in that fight where they would actually want to be to follow up on it. And so it's a little bit awkward. And the fact that this thing doesn't have a bomb just kind of kills it. It really kind of needs a... If you give this a burst bomb, now we're probably in business. Now it's probably worth running, even despite that issue that I talked about. Because, like, Inkjet isn't usually something you're going to use as a retake special. This is a weird meta where we just don't have a lot of weapons with good retake specials, and the ones that do have those specials are often bad. So, like, they add some new kits into the game that have a bunch of better specials. Like, you give a shooter a Booyah Bomb at some point here, and, like, Inkjet probably falls off quite a bit, and we've got a lot of related changes to the meta from there. But for now, the way that Inkjet's being used, you know, being such a linchpin of a team's game plan for moving forward, this isn't really the best weapon to be putting that on, because this one just kind of wants to go for trades and get picks. But again, when you give a Tri-Slosher a burst bomb, good things happen for the Tri-Slosher. So, okay. Custom Jet has been a relatively popular choice at, like, low to mid levels of competitive play. People saw, you know, a top level team using it at one point. I've been seeing this get used at a low or mid level of competitive play a lot. And I understand that, and it makes a lot of sense, because it's a really easy weapon to understand. You paint ground, you throw rain, then, you know, you shoot at the people who are really far away from you, who your team has engaged on. Like, it's a pretty intuitive competitive play style. The problem is, this weapon still paints really well, but also has longer range, a significantly better kill time, it's not even close, and a significantly better bomb. So, despite the fact that you'd probably prefer an Inkstorm over the Inkjet for what we're trying to do with this thing, it's just outclassed in too many ways. The DPS especially is just really, really bad. You don't want a weapon that has this low DPS unless it's providing a lot of something else. Like, people did not play this for the main weapon in Splatoon 2. They played it because it was one of the fastest Inkjets you could, or fastest Stingrays you could get. So, yeah, that's where C-Jet's at, I think. Tri-Stringer. Tri-Stringer is just... I feel like it's outclassed in a number of ways. But one of the things that this weapon does, which you can say that it does that's fairly unique, is that every aspect of its kit helps it engage in every fight that's there on the map. So if you're playing a Tri-Stringer, you need to be supporting every single fight. You need to have some kind of hitbox or some kind of impact on that spot every single time there's a fight. Killer Whale is not the greatest special, It's helpful and it's reliable, but it's not going to win a retake by itself. The DPS is definitely pretty low, so you want to be comboing with something else. So it does work pretty well with something like Machine or Splash in that they're going to do some chip damage, and it's going to be able to follow up on that sometimes. It has pretty long range, and it's able to hit an arc shots over the top of stuff, which is the reason that it's not just hard forced out by Splatlings and Chargers, because those are, to some extent, line-of-sight weapons. They're weapons that more often need to be able to see you on a straight line than to be able to hit you. Whereas this thing can play around ledges and cover a lot more to get close to things like an E-liter that would otherwise just beat it outright. But we're also seeing there are some comps that I've seen run, especially at like the mid to high level. They don't make it super high past this because the mechanical skill of their opponents increases, but you'll see people who just like to throw things at you, where they'll run like brush plus stringer, and so you'll have bombs coming at you, and then at some point in time the team is going to pop, they'll throw like bomb, and then whale, and there'll just be so many hitboxes on screen that it takes a significant amount of mechanical skill and preparation to be able to survive that scenario when they run at you afterward. And so that kind of a comp, like, I've seen work up to a certain point. But we're not seeing it very much at top level at all. It's very rare to see, and I definitely think that there are many better options, because remember that anchor, pseudo-anchor spot is being competed for by the Ballpoint, the Stamper, the Flingza, the Heavy, the E-liter, the Nautilus. Like, there are too many weapons that want that spot, and I don't think the Tri-Stringer beats them for it. So, it's not terrible. I'm not like, I don't feel like someone's throwing when I have one on my team in solo queue or anything like that, but it's also just, there are a lot of other choices that I would put before it. And then Zimmy, if Big Bubbler ever comes back, I mean, Zimmy's coming back, but man, it has been gone for some time. We're seeing, for one thing, we're seeing so much Tri-Strike, which I've talked about why I don't like that idea, but one of the side effects of that is that is a weapon that actually counters Big Bubbler pretty well. And so that's been keeping it out, because everyone and their mom is running a Neo Splash, even though, I don't think that that's necessarily a good idea. So that's one big problem they've been having. Crab Tank also shreds it. Booyah also shreds it pretty well. And again, those are two of the most common weapons you're going to see in the game. So Big Bubbler is not doing super hot for itself right now, and they keep giving the Mini not a bomb, because they're worried about what happens when you give the Mini a good bomb. But yeah, Minis have just not had good kits since Splatoon 2. And until they were to get a good third one, I don't know that these are going to be all that high, or if they buff Big Bubbler or Hammer or something. We've got a tier here, which is, this could work. Like, I would put these weapons up in like maybe the third tier on exactly one mapper mode, and any place else that you're trying to run this, it's not a good idea. So the best example of that, I would say, is the N-Zap. You can run this in Rainmaker, because it has Tacticooler, and it gets that Tacticooler fast, and you're going to be able to, make Rainmaker pushes with it quickly. It's going to paint for the Rainmaker better than a Tri-Slosher will, so you can play that kind of supportive role to move the team forward, and it's still good enough at fighting that sometimes it can get value out of the Tacticooler itself. If you're using it for combat, the Tri is still definitely the better option, and I think it generally outclasses the Zap most of the time. But I can see there being some use cases where you need a little bit more paint, you want a shooter, you want a lethal bomb for stopping the Rainmaker, something like that. Like, I could see this getting used. It's not you're not throwing by grabbing it if you have a particular reason like that for running it. Did you see Frosty's tweet about N-Zap getting opening Gambit assist stacks from Tacticooler? That's interesting. I could see that being a thing. I want to see it proven before I bump it up a tier. Like, I'm already putting N-Zap in a place where it's like, you can definitely run this, and there are good reasons to run it here and there. I think it was discovered, like, today. Okay. That's a development that could definitely shift this. That could change, you know, this landscape at least. So go run that Hitzel and like let me know what you think about it, because that seems very interesting. But for now, you know, we're just in the theory phase. We haven't really gone and seen that and proven it, and I prefer, you know, especially if I'm this late into a season, if I'm this late into a patch, to have at least a little bit of data behind what I'm saying, rather than just making it predictions. Like, I did make a day one tier list, but that was, again, predictions, because there's a high demand for what the best perspective is on the game at that particular moment in time. Right now, you know, this late into the season, I'd prefer it be, you know, based on what we know for a fact and have tested in competitive play. So, but yeah, that seems fun. That seems like something that N-Zap players should definitely go and grind in solo and see what they can do with it. Because, like, again, if opening Gambit can make this weapon work, think about what it can make it for an actual weapon. For a weapon that functions. God, because opening Gambit plus Tacticooler buff, you're moving at light speed. That is actually the single fastest weapon in the game, if you can have all of that. That's like... I guess you could be faster if you had opening Gambit on a Sploosh, and that Sploosh got the Tacticooler from somebody else on its team. But that's it. That's the only way that you can zoom faster in this game. This Charger, you know, being able to throw bombs is nice for it. It gets value out of those on defense, and it's still a Charger, which is not a terrible weapon at all. It does struggle a little bit in that it needs to get just a little bit too close to the enemy team sometimes to be able to be impactful, and sometimes it can get punished for that. But the question is, how in the world do you use VAC? Because Ink Vac is arguably the worst special in the game at the moment. That's the argument that Shadow Wind makes for it. And Shadow Wind is better at the video game than I am. So you have to justify Ink Vac, and if you can do that, then you can run this. But there are, like, you can put it on the tower. You can use it to force your way through beams on the left side of Eel Tail. You can, like, maybe use it to cross the Mincemeat Bridge. I'm really reaching here. Like, there aren't that many cases where you really want an Ink Vac at all. And so that's why this goes down so low. You've got to find a reason to want one of those before you're ever going to want to use this. And then Dynamo, I have seen work played on Flounder Heights, where you're sloshing down over the top of the enemy's plat, like that kind of little house you've got at the very top up there. It's really good at clearing that area out from around it, and it makes it kind of difficult to push in against it. We haven't seen it getting used at top level very much, because people are probably just going to run a couple of buckets for that same utility. But that's the only place that I could see this really getting a lot of use. And Tacticooler on it, really a huge mismatch. It can't even use that selfishly very well. I guess it moves a little bit faster, but it's still going to be slow. It's really hurting right now. It needs a better kit. Bring back the K Dynamo, and it could maybe move up a tier. But I can't see very many uses for it. And most of the time, you know, this is why it's at the bottom of this tier. If it's not in, like, that kind of very specific scenario, it's, like, down here somewhere. It's, like, really, really, really low. So, like, it can reach up to about this level, but its average is probably hereabouts. So, definitely, you know, not a weapon that I recommend one-tricking right now. Not that that's going to stop anyone, because every Dynamo ever is a one-trick. Okay. Dapples. There are some, like, very specific situations where it can kind of work a little bit, because it's a very fast, almost teleport that you get from the rolls. And so if you're able to find a way to get on top of someone, which the kit is not helping, especially this thing, do at all, then maybe you've got some options. Like, torpedoes at lower levels are great for it, because you throw the torpedo, they fumble around trying to shoot at the thing, and then by the time they've shot the thing, you're on top of them. At high level, they shoot that thing too fast, and they're still kiting you back even after it's down. and you can't really get in that well. And so you're relying on what, a reef slider? Getting in is really the hard part. You need to shark really hard with these things, but the beacons can be sort of helpful sometimes, and it's an aggressive weapon that you get with the beacons that actually wants to jump into them. So, you know, given the Tacticooler, there's enough utility there that maybe there's something you can get out of it. And it's something that we have seen at top levels of play in Japan. It's not something that I've seen any Western player try to be pushing that much. The best you've got are like solo queue one tricks. So, and then mini, you know, you put Nyagora on this mini, and they're gonna kill everybody. It's a mini with a burst bomb, and that by itself is already really dangerous. And Hammer is in the best state that it has ever been, so you know, it's not the worst thing to put on a team. But that's like, you have someone on your team who solo mained mini with burst bomb back in Splatoon 2 or something like that. You know, that one patch where the mini with the missiles and the burst bomb was the top tier weapon in the game, like, that's the one patch where that player was in heaven, and they just never stopped playing the weapon from there. And if that's the case and you've got that player still, if they say, hey, I think I can play V mini on this, that's where you go, okay, let's see if it works. And you do that in a scrim first. You don't do that in a tournament yet. You wait to see if it works in the scrim, and then if it does, then you run it. That's kind of where I'm at with that. Okay, opening Gambit is hilariously viable on the Splattershot Nova. Like, it takes this weapon up to a level that it should not be able to reach. That level is still not very high, especially, you know, against top level players. But you can run this in solo queue and get like a lot higher than you would normally be able to get with that weapon. The damage on it is still absolute trash. But the extra movement it gets, and the, you know, the extra value you get out of that opening Gambit, you're able to hold on to it for a very long time. Like, that gear is going to do very outsized work for this weapon in particular, because this weapon's playstyle is put point sensors on things. And putting point sensors on things gives you an assist, and that lets you chain assists and keep on refreshing the amount of time that you have the opening Gambit for. My understanding is that the way that it works is if you get an assist, it adds 15 seconds to the timer, and that time accumulates. So if your team wins a team fight, you should in theory be gaining a minute of opening Gambit from that, because you should be a factor in almost every single fight that happens, because you can just keep throwing point sensors at things. And you have a pretty decent range where you can also hit shots on things too, or just fire lasers at them. Everything in this kit is really good for getting assists. And so that's why opening Gambit is so strong on it. But it is a Gambit because as soon as you lose it, now you're just playing a Splattershot Nova. And that is down, like, here, probably. So, yeah, it's not something that I would, you know, play in a serious tournament or something, but it is very funny how effective it can be given certain circumstances. Now is the tier where we make a lot of people sad, because these are weapons where it's like, I've seen it tried, I've seen people play it, I get what strengths the weapon has, and I just don't think that at a competitive level you want to run these things. So let's start with the one that's probably seen the most play at top level, and that I disagree with them doing that, but it's the one that I'll probably have to defend the most. I think that 96 Deco is just not worth it. Kraken in particular, I think, is just not worth it. You're running 96 Deco because you want Kraken, because the 96 is a very immobile weapon. If you want to, you know, a gal with a splash wall, you probably pick a 52 so that it can move up a little bit faster. If you want a mid-ranged weapon, you probably pick like a Squeezer for that sort of play, because it's got longer range, still has a pretty good kill time, and you don't have to worry about RNG as much. If you're picking the 96, you're picking it for the Kraken, and I think Kraken is just one of the weaker specials in the game right now. It's not that it does nothing. It can kind of push the enemy team around and shepherd them into a frontline rush. But the problem is you're lacking a weapon while you're doing that. You are turning the game into a 3v4 plus a Kraken. And that Kraken, I don't think, is worth losing a player. Yes, you're going to survive it, but is your team? Because the enemy team can just walk past the Kraken a lot of the time and just attack your team. They can just run away from the Kraken, and then the Kraken itself only gets about 4 seconds of actually being in play before it has to back up, because otherwise they're going to camp the Kraken's transformation and kill it. And that's something that top-level players are absolutely fishing for. If you transform in Kraken in anywhere near a dangerous position, you're going to get splatted for that. And that's not worth the displacement that you'd caused in those approximately 4 seconds of having an impact. It's just very rare that the Kraken actually gets splats at a top level. You see it maybe like once or twice in a game. Twice is the high end from what I've seen off of a single player using a Kraken. And that's just not enough value to get out of the special when all else it's doing is making people either back up a little bit or, more often, run forward at the rest of your team. I really do not think that it is as viable as the players who have been experimenting with it seem to be showing it is from its usage rate. So I've got it down here. I do have it on the high end because, again, a lot of people have been giving it a try. A lot of people have been, you know, trying to make it work. I don't think it works.
Hey.
Crabbing. There's a Kraken coming after me.
Ball moding.
What a special. What a special. So Junior, a lot of people have the idea of Junior from Splatoon 2, that you sit back and you bomb spam. And that wasn't even true in Splatoon 2. That is not a thing that you can do in this game and have that much of an impact. In Splatoon 2, you were closer to being able to do that, because at least this was a weapon that, even if it didn't engage with its main weapon very often, was at least going to be able to pop armor and use that to get the rest of the team in. But this weapon doesn't get armor. This weapon gets Big Bubbler, and Big Bubbler is not in a great place in the metagame right now. This weapon also, you know, the idea that you really wanted to use at top level in Splatoon 2 was throw one bomb and then paint. And so the reason that that worked so well was, again, the armor, and we don't have the armor. So here we just have a weapon that makes people think that they are having a significant enough impact on the game to justify choosing the weapon because they can throw 2 bombs on 1 ink tank and then empty their entire ink tank, have to wait for a good amount of time, have a lot of downtime before they can do anything again. With a T-Tech, you can throw a bomb and then you can fight. You can throw a bomb and then you have a better special to use than the Big Bubbler that you can maybe try to help the team go in with. You have longer range, you have better accuracy, and you're still not even losing that much in terms of paint. You're definitely losing some, but not a ton. Another issue with the Junior is that you can't paint as aggressively as something like the Splattershot can. Because of the short range, you need to already have control as a team of the spot of the ground that you want to paint, and you want to be kind of like going back and getting control of that. Junior was a really good pairing with Tetras in Splatoon 2, because what happened was the Tetras created the space, and then the Junior locked the space in by painting for it, and then gave armor back to the Tetras in exchange for the Tetras getting that space for them. And now the Tetras can shark wherever they want, and, you know, there was a lot of synergy there. But with this weapon in this game, it's not going to have armor to go in with. It has to use the Big Bubbler if it's going to try and fight something. And the Big Bubbler does help it fight. You know, the Battle Junior players are potentially doing better in this game than they were before, because the Big Bubbler makes it so that the only things that can hit the Junior are actually in the Junior's range, which is nice. But it's still a very weak fighting weapon. It is still a spray shooter. And I don't think that it's justified for being used when one of its greatest assets, the ability to paint a lot, isn't going towards a top-tier special. That's, you know, again, with special farming weapons, it needs to be a special that's worth getting. And that was an issue that I took with the Tri-Strike weapons up here, that the narrative is becoming that we may have overrated Tri-Strike a little bit. At least Tri-Strike, you know, is close to being really good. I don't think Big Bubbler is even close to that right now. And so it's significantly further down. And these weapons at least give you the utility, even if you're not getting the utility from using the special, you're at least getting some better fighting utility from these than you're going to get with a Junior. So you got to watch out for bomb spam. And it's not like it's not annoying to fight against a junior because of the bomb spam, but annoying and powerful are not the same thing. As long as you play around this and have the mechanical skill to dodge those bombs, it's not going to be having much of an impact on a match at all. Same kind of issue with the Zap 89, although I'd actually probably put this a little bit higher up because I think the special is slightly better, but also the main weapon is also significantly better. The sheer special output is better on this, but again, the specials aren't really what are best about it. This does still have a bomb that it can use, which is a fairly useful one. Like, I can use this and still anticipate getting, like, within, like, 150 points of my X power peak. It's still not, like, terrible because it's a short-range shooter with a bomb. Like, you can't complain too much about that. It's just the bomb and the special are a little bit underwhelming. Okay, Rapid. Rapid suffers a lot from not having another poking tool, from not having something it can combo its damage with. That makes it very, very slow DPS-wise, and top-level players are just going to respect its range and not get trapped by it very much. You're going to hit one shot, and then you're not going to hit other shots. And yeah, you've backed them away, but you haven't gotten a kill for it, and it's not going to paint very much for the time. And also, it gets Tri-Strike, which these are better users of Tri-Strike, like we've said, because they have bomb combos. This has a mine, and it cannot combo with it. So, significantly weaker special for not being able to combo bombs with the extra displacement of the Tri-Strikes. I put it down here. Goo Tuber had a slight niche when it was able to just farm for missiles really fast, and try to use tap shots to maybe get like some, try to get some assists with its teammates. And if you're a Charger player, you can kind of make the Charger part of it work and be getting missiles in the meantime. Problem is, once missiles were nerfed, they fell out of meta significantly. It ceased to be considered as an alternative to the Flingza, like it was very briefly, and we haven't really seen it since at all. Big Swig has, again, had one of the biggest glow-ups of any weapon in the game, because there was a time where I would have called this the absolute worst weapon in the entire game. But they buffed its object damage, which is huge, because object damage matters a lot. Object damage lets you counter Crab, lets you counter Big Bubbler, lets you counter Wave Breaker, lets you counter a number of things. It also pops the Rainmaker shield faster. And this thing is still, we need to remember, one of the single best painting weapons in the entire game, with its horizontal flicks. So you can use this thing to cheese the zone a little bit. You can use this thing to get a little bit more damage on people now. It's a much more consistent two-shot, which is, again, it's still pretty bad at fighting, but it's not anywhere near as bad as it was before. And smart Big Swig players are able to kind of keep people away from them at the very least, and not just totally just get rushed down and die. And that's all that it really needs. With the paint output that it's got, it still has Ink Fact to deal with. You give this thing a good kit, now I could see it moving at least up to here. But it does not have the kit that it needs to be up there yet, so we're waiting for it to get its second kit, and then we'll see. It's going to have a really long name once it gets... Think like the Big Swig Roller Deco. The Neo Big Swig Roller. That's just like way too many things to say. C Junior is very, very popular at like low-level competitive play and below, because very similar situation to what you'd see with like the C-Jet, where it's easy to understand what this thing is trying to do, and it's easy to execute that plan. The issue is that plan doesn't actually get you as much value, especially at top level. Your torpedoes are shreddable, and so you're basically just farming wave breakers. And just farming wave breakers without having that much combo potential with your team, without having much of a kill threat, like at least this thing has bombs that it can spam that are actually going to kill something sometimes. Like, it's easy to get this idea in your head that, oh, we're just going to overwhelm them because they're going to be constantly pelted with torpedoes, and then there are going to be wave breaker waves coming out, and there's just going to be so many sources of damage, and then my team is going to push in, and like everything is going to blow up. But in reality, what tends to happen is that top-level players are mechanically skilled enough to not get damaged by either the wave breaker or the torpedo. And then all you're left with is a Splattershot Jr., and that is a spray shooter. And so I don't think that's enough. Wave breaker is, again, like, not a bad special at all. But that's the one thing about this kit that I like. and that's not enough to carry a weapon. Bamboo. Bamboo has seen some use on like a Cherry Limeade comp. I think Shiny has run it before and used it to some success. Whale is not bad, and the Bamboo as a main weapon is fairly good. It definitely needs a little bit of something more somewhere. But it is a powerful zoning tool as a main weapon. Like, I'm never putting the Bamboo too far down because as a main weapon, it's just really strong. The kit is like very meh for it, and so I don't see it rising anytime soon. But a new kit could absolutely pop off. L3. It gets crab. It paints pretty well, so it gets crab pretty well. But you know what else gets crab pretty well? The best weapon in the game. So I don't see a reason to ever use this thing. Curling Bomb is hilarious to put on this thing. Like, what in the world does an L3 want to be running forward at you with a Curling Bomb for? Especially if its whole thing is it's going to farm crab. So that means it wants to stay back. So, like, again, what is the Curling Bomb for? What are you doing with that thing? Moving out into mid slightly faster so that you can then try to paint the Rainmaker shield without a bomb. Because it won't reach because it's up on a pedestal. Forge Pro. Machine. One of the best weapons in the entire game. Paints better than this thing does, so it gets more Booyah Bombs, which is the key thing that you like about this weapon. Also, probably better in combat, because this thing doesn't have MPU, so it's going to have to 3-shot every time. So while it's going to have a faster kill time, it's also very ink hungry, and the machine can put fizzy bombs out in front to keep you away from it. Whereas this has a suction bomb, which, as we've mentioned, has had a significant fall from grace since it went from Splatoon 2 to Splatoon 3. Nobody's running this, really. There was a meme post that someone made at one point saying, like, I think it was, like, Kyo, who was like, actually, you know, I think Forge Pro is slept on. Like, people should be trying that thing. He said that as a joke, folks. He said that to see how many people would blindly believe him without questioning what he said. He did not actually stand by that. This is still, you know, down pretty low as a weapon. Gloogas, they got about the best kit that they can hope for, and they're still down here because the main weapon's still not great. And I don't have anything particularly new to say about it. The main weapon has too low of a fire rate, which means it doesn't paint very well, which means it doesn't get that Booyah very often, and it makes it very aim-intensive. It makes it so that you need to hit your shots and hit every single shot, so it's technically difficult when it doesn't really need to be technically difficult. The machine is very, very consistent. You have very big hitboxes, and it's really easy to wall people out with. This thing, you've really got to be able to hit your shots, and if you miss your shots, it's very punishing if you don't. Dualie Squelchers. Dualie Squelchers are a phenomenal weapon that are in the wrong video game. This is a weapon that is the best in the game at kiting people, but the problem is that kiting people is not very strong in this game, because if you're backing up in these hallways of maps, you probably can't back up sideways very far. This weapon loved to get lodged into corners of square maps and just constantly needle at the enemy team, be like, hey, you've got to deal with me. You got to deal with me. Oh, nope, I'm running back over here. If you run back and chase me, then you're going to be away from the objective and you can't do anything anymore. And they'd lodge themselves in there and be a constant thorn in your side, take multiple people to clear out, and buy a lot of time and space for your team. And you just don't have maps where you can do that because there are no corners like that. If you're running away, you're going to hit the sidewall in like 2 dodge rolls, and now you have nowhere else to go. And so they either splat you or just ignore you and run forward and go after your team. So if you try to fight them head on, you're going to have to kite backwards, and kiting backwards means you're giving up space. So by the time you win the fight, you will splat the player, start moving forward, and by the time you get to where that fight started, the enemy player will already be respawned again because of how long it took you to splat them and get yourself backed away. You lose a lot of the, even in the best case scenario, you lose a lot of the value you could get from this weapon because of the map design. So that's the reason that it's down as low as it is. Because it's got a great bomb, it's got a great special, the main weapon is really good at what it does, just what it does is not something that works super well in this game. Splattershot Pro, Same kind of problem as the Forge Pro, except now it doesn't even have a lethal bomb. It has a line marker. And granted, it's gotten better and better. There's been some power creep on that thing, but it's still definitely not a sub-weapon that anyone is clamoring for. And it gets Crab Tank, but again, you're competing with Crab Tank for, you know, this thing, which is just going to actually get a significant number of Crab Tanks, and this thing, which is actually going to get a significant number of Crab Tanks, and also is able to fight things. So, too ink hungry, not going to get a lot of that special in the first place. Mediocre in terms of fighting, it definitely has its moments, but the only time that we really saw the Splattershot Pro get used in Splatoon 2 was when MPU made it so that its kill time was faster in some cases, and that's not the case anymore. So it's just going to be solidly mediocre for probably most of this game, most of this game's lifespan. Rapid Pro, very solid main weapon, has Ink Vac, and also doesn't have Lethal Bomb. Its kit is really letting it down here. This could be significantly stronger with a better kit, but it has not gotten any of that kind of attention for a while. So, hoping that this one gets a new kit sometime soon, because I'd really love to see what it can do. Slosher Deco, there are better Zipcaster options. I was thinking, you know, when it came out, hey, maybe there's some cool combo you can do, or maybe your ability to slosh over ledges helps you a lot more with this, but I don't think there's anything that the Stamper doesn't do better than the Slosher Deco. You can use the ability to hit over ledges and stuff if you want, but it's not enough to outweigh just how much better of a weapon this is across the board. You know, better main weapon, has insane range, has really good combo potential, has a burst bomb that it can use to combo with. It's got a line marker that can combo, I guess, if you hit a direct with it. This burst bomb combos if you hit an indirect with it, though. Much less precise, much more likely to get value. So, yeah, I think it's just way too outclassed. Okay, and now we get down to the weapons where I'm like, if I see this on a competitive team, I'm not sure about it. I'm not sure about that one. I'll bump this up one. I think this doesn't belong quite in that tier. I think it's a little bit better. So this thing, I still have yet to see anybody prove to me that this can fight. If this can fight, if I see any evidence that this is a weapon that can slay, then instantly up like 3 tiers at least. But I just haven't seen anyone popping off and getting like doubles and triples with this thing. Until that happens, all it is a paint bot for missiles. And that by itself is not enough. The K-Shot in Splatoon 2 was a paint bot for missiles that could push in with the missiles and fight. The V-Jet in Splatoon 2 probably was a little bit overrated, but at least it was a weapon that had a lot of range and could reliably help its team in fights from that range. This is just like a little bit too short range and a little bit too finicky to hit your one-shots with. It's just not quite enough going for it combat-wise. And if someone proves me wrong, I move this up 4 tiers instantly. But it's not there for me yet. So yeah, I feel like that goes down here. Not probably somewhere around here, really. Not where it was at. Okay, Kraken Roller. This is a weapon that's trying to live on the enemy side and put down a bunch of beacons and get a bunch of Sharkin kills and use its Kraken. And the problem is that Kraken is not a good special weapon and that people are much better and more aware at getting rid of beacons and much better at painting defensively so they don't get sharked by rollers at a top level. So this falls off pretty hard. Bloblobber is a paint bot, and it gets pretty decent special for that, but again, paint bots by themselves are not enough. And the big problem with this weapon is that the control that it's able to have on the map, if you put a, let's say, Charger right here, it's going to one-shot something at this range at the same speed that it's going to one-shot something at this range. You know, this entire zone is very powerfully controlled by the Charger. With the Bloblobber, someone right here, yeah, they can probably, you know, one-shot that, do significant damage to it pretty quick. But somebody over here if they get hit by the blobs at that max range, they've made a mistake. Like, they are being pressured into the blobs or something. Like, it takes so long for those blobs to actually travel to that person. You can just dodge them. And so the zone control that it has around here is strong, but the zone control that it's going to have around here is, you're only going to hit one or two of those blobs, and the zone control that it has around here is you're going to make someone move, and that's it. And that's a really big weakness for the weapon to have because of the projectile speed, and also the fact that sometimes the blobs are just going to bounce in weird ways and interact with ledges and not hit people. The bouncing off of walls is nice, and you can use it in corridors, and that's its biggest strength, but that's way too situational for the weapon to be able to slay or do anything other than be a paint bot for rain. And you know what else can paint for rain? This can paint for rain. This can paint for rain. This thing puts on a lot of pressure from long distance. Like, that's its whole thing. So if you're trying to paint bot for rain, just pick up Explo. And, like, you're not going to paint bot with this weapon, but, like, you could do it if you wanted to, I guess. This is going to get the ink storms a lot faster. This is going to have better slaying potential. So those are your rain weapons if you want them. Or even, actually, paint bot for rain, that would be this weapon, too. This one can also do that. A little bit less powerful control, but still much more reliable and consistent DPS than you're going to get out of a Bloblobber. Okay. Splooshes. We did a professional development on the Sploosh recently. This is a rat weapon that's trying to get into the enemy base and is trying to be a distraction, basically. Because against strong players, they're going to paint defensively enough that you're not going to be able to sneak up on them very reliably. That's, you're going to be able to get it sometimes, but you're not going to be able to get it every time, and you want weapons that are going to consistently provide value. So what you're going to be able to do consistently is get behind the enemy team and make them be like, ah, crap, now I've got to go and deal with this thing that's in my base. And that draws them away, and that makes it so that they kind of have to fight you, have to deal with you. But the Tetras can do that, and also have range that is something you couldn't consider melee range. They do paint better than the Tetra Dualies does, but the positions that they're going to be going up and painting are often positions, if they're going to be playing the rat play style, they're going to be painting positions your teammates can't even take advantage of because they're too far behind the enemy lines. So you're either using this as a paint support on your side, in which case it's getting Hammer, which is not something that you're especially going to want to be farming, and this is Whale, which is fine, but a little bit mid. And then the sub-weapon lets this thing move around pretty quickly, which is nice. The sub-weapon here can let things jump behind the enemy team, and so there's a very gimmicky back cap kind of play style that we showed off on a Silly Comp Sundays once, where you just put down a bunch of beacons behind the enemy team and keep jumping into them and keep the enemy team stuck in their own base. That's a thing that against more mechanically skilled and aware players will start to fall off. It is a gimmick, but that's a thing you can try to do. Splat Roller, I think ambush weapons are generally a relatively weak playstyle if that's all they bring to the table. It's kind of like paint bots. At least if you're paint botting for a good special, it can kind of work. And at least if you've got a really, really fast kill time, the ambush playstyle can work. But this thing doesn't paint for itself very well. The curling bomb is nice, but Big Bubbler is really not doing a lot for it. This thing is going to have a faster kill time if you get super close to someone, and the extra range that it's going to provide is probably not worth the added number of frames that you need to swing the thing. So it's too high commitment, and it's probably going to get painted out by top-level players who are going to paint defensively and keep themselves safe from it. Gold Arrow Spray is a paint bot that throws Booyah Bombs, and that is literally the only thing it can successfully do. Paint, throw Booyah Bombs. Sprinkler is not helping it in combat at all. Its main weapon is not helping it in combat at all. It is easily one of the weakest combat weapons in the entire game. Having Booyah Bombs constantly is not worth giving up that much for your main weapon. This thing can only throw a Booyah Bomb at you, and then you move away from it, dodge the Booyah Bomb, rush it, and its team is basically at a 3.5v4 because this main weapon sucks so much at fighting. If you paint something but die trying to paint it, they're going to outpaint you anyway. You know, a Tetra Dualies paints more than this thing if the Tetra Dualies is able to reliably kill it, even though the Tetras suck at painting. So, really, really weak, even though it's going to get a lot of Booyah Bombs and a lot of paint. And that's why, you know, a lot of people start thinking that the Aerospray is really strong early on because it puts a lot of paint on the ground, and that's the score line that you see in Turf War. You see high number of points painted, and you go, oh, I had a bigger number. That means I helped my team the most. And in competitive play, that's not the way that it works. It's more about controlling space. Carbon. I don't know why you run this, ever. Like, the Carbon Deco has a combo that splats really quickly with the Burst Bomb. This does not. This has an Auto Bomb that is never going to do anything in a fight that a Carbon should be taking. It's going to give you information about where somebody is, and then it's all on you and the main weapon to make something happen. Zipcaster is not a bad combination with it, but you've got this, and those are probably your best options. And then at least with this weapon, you have a main weapon that's got a decent amount of range and you can actually poke at people and hit over ledges, you know, more reliably. This thing, like, sometimes the Carbon is, like, trying to get under a ledge that's just too high up for it to even hit over because it's got such short range. So the kit really lets it down here, and it doesn't get to play its ambush play style anywhere near as well as its older brother over here. So just let the big brother play. There's not much of a reason to pick this over it. Luna Blaster's in a very similar scenario. It just doesn't paint enough for itself, just like the Carbon Deco. It has a nice lethal bomb, and it has, you know, a pretty good fight against any weapon that it can get close to, but getting close to someone with something this short range is the hard part. And it's a part that's going to be made very hard by top-level teams, again, because of defensive painting. So same kind of issue with this. Fizzy Bomb is really nice as well. Like, these both do at least have good poking tools, which, honestly, I would say probably puts them over the top of the Carbon, because they can actually sit back and poke with those, but they're not going to get their ink back very fast. They're not going to paint much at all. Even though they have light movement speed, the fact that it takes them so long to paint a trail in front of them means that they're still going to move about as fast as a vanilla blaster, because the fire rate is still really slow, but they have to fire more often to get the same amount of paint down. And then Inkbrush Nouveau. I don't know why you would run this over the other Inkbrush, to be honest. People talk about, like, ooh, if you get behind them and put mines down in their base, then it's really annoying. You can't get behind them in this game because there are no flank routes, because it's every map is a hallway. It's the same problem that you've got with this guy, where if there were those flank routes where you could get in behind the enemy team, where you could circumnavigate mid on, like, most maps, then yeah, you could go in and put mines down, and that would be annoying, and then you'd shark them and stuff. And if Hammer were better, then this would also probably be a little bit higher up, but the mines just don't do that much, because you're either going to use the mines from behind the enemy team, and how do you get there, or you're going to use the mines in front of the enemy team and hope they run into them, which means you're not pushing up and trying to use them at all. They're just kind of sitting out there, and you hope that your teammates are nearby enough that they will be able to follow up on the damage the mine does, or the information. Not a lot of kit synergy, really. Okay, and now we're down to the weapons that I do not recommend under any circumstances. We've got the Jet Squelcher, which has Line Marker, weakest sub in the game, Ink Vac, weakest special in the game, all on the same kit. And it's a kit which has a main weapon that really wants to have a really good special to farm, and it doesn't have that either. So this is just... the main weapon's fine, but, like, the kit is doing nothing for it. Just always run this one instead, I would say. Unless there's really a moment where your team wants an Ink Vac. And I feel like that's really rare. Like, it's such a rare circumstance that you have a C-Jet player who will want to occasionally flex onto this. That's the only time I could see this getting used. But I don't even know why you would want that thing. So, Clash Blaster. We talked about this on a professional development recently. It's not great. The main weapon is just really short range and also one of the worst painting weapons in the entire game. So even though it's got a really nice kit, it's going to have some ink efficiency problems if it tries throwing a bomb, because then it's only going to get like 4 shots out, and those 4 shots are what you actually need to splat someone sometimes. It's got a Zuka, but it's never going to farm for that Zuka very often. And so you're left with, well, what can the Clash Blaster do? It can hit around corners pretty well, but from relatively short range, and there are other weapons that can do that. You want to hit around corners, you've got the Range Blaster. You can hit over the top of it with the Tri-Stringer. You can hit around it with the Blaster here. Like, you've got the Sloshing Machine. Like, it does that one bit of utility better than the others just because of how big the indirect blast radius is, but, like, does it really? Because it does so little damage, it's so avoidable. Not great. 96. You know, say what you will about the 96 Deco, you should always run the 96 Deco over this because, again, Ink Vac. Ink Vac is the kind of thing that is more likely to get you killed sometimes than it is to actually help the team. And this is a weapon where, you know, at least with the Tent, if you're trying to use the Ink Vac to get your team in, like, you can launch the shield forward and use that to continually move forward as you go. With the 96, you don't have a way to, like, approach with your Ink Vac. So the special is even less useful. And the main weapon is slow, and it doesn't have a sub-weapon to back it up. Sprinkler is not what you need here. This is one of the weakest kits that you can give a weapon, and they gave it to a relatively mediocre main weapon. H3. Poor H3. H3 is one of the most mismatched kits in the entire game. It has nothing that it can poke or combo with because it has point sensor. So you're really just going to have to hit your 3 shots, which makes it extremely aim intensive. You don't want to have to rely on this in any kind of defensive situation. If a power clam's running at the basket, if the Rainmaker's running for the goal, this is like one of the last weapons that you want being the weapon that has to stop it. And that's the only damage that it's going to get. Tacticooler is not helping this thing at all. This is a weapon that wants to sit back and farm specials and play for crossfire support. It doesn't want to run in at you. It doesn't want to be going down a lot. It has all the tools it needs to not go down a lot, but the tools that it gets in return, the special that it gets for safely farming, is just not going to do as much for the team as other stuff is. And then we have the weapons where it's like, if you are playing on a competitive team comp, I just do not see why you would want to pick one of these weapons. You're memeing at this point if you're picking one of these. Like, it would be understandable for the opponents to consider this to be actual disrespect to pick one of these, unless you are like a one trick on that weapon and you're trying to push it for your own personal reasons. Snipe Rider is just not a good sniper. Hitting one shot with a charger is hard enough. Having to hit 2 of them stinks. And the Bamboozler is going to do a much better job of that because it doesn't need to get that whole charge up to be able to do those kinds of shots. It can just... It has a much faster fire rate overall because it can just charge, shot, charge, shot, charge, shot, charge, shot. Whereas this thing has to stand still long enough to get the circle to go all the way around, and then if it moves, it loses it. It doesn't have those shots anymore. So, it's just... I mean, you can move left and right a little bit, but it needs to play with the positioning of a backline charger, but it has the kind of damage output and, you know, fire rate that you would want to be able to use on the front line, so just nothing about it really works. And on top of that, they gave it Sprinkler Tacticooler, neither of which synergize with it at all. Sprinkler is only really going to be good for kind of defending itself a little bit and maybe painting for the Tacticooler, but it's painting for a Tacticooler, which is something that it can't use, that only its team really wants to use. So, really tragic kit choice for that thing. I think they wanted it to be a little bit more on the aggressive side, but it's not going to outclass the Bamboo with the main weapon like that. It needs the kit to do the rest of that work for it. Tentabrella. I would actually put, from my experience with it, I'd put maybe like hereabouts. I think it's slightly better than the rest of these. Brellas have the problem that you get shot through the shield a lot, but the combination of beacons and vac here lets you set up retake plays in ways that a lot of these weapons cannot. It makes it so that like your team can actually push in with the shield and the vac. And that's slow as heck. It takes a lot of setup time, and that's not great. But at least this thing can actually help your team get back towards the objectives sometimes if the shield works. And that's a lot of asterisks, and that's why the number of asterisks is why it's so low here. But there's a game plan with this, at least. There's something that you can do with it that makes some sort of sense a little bit, I guess. Still very, very weak. Would not put it any higher than it is. Splatbrella, it's also got a really weak kit. It's got, like I talked about earlier, Sprinkler, Tri-Strike, Sprinkler is not the same combo that Splat Bomb, Tri-Strike, Splat Bomb is. Especially since the first Sprinkler is going to get deleted as soon as you throw the second Sprinkler. And so the kit isn't helping it out a lot. It's not able to play that kind of support role because that's not enough value out of that special that you're going to get to want to play it as a support. So maybe you try to play it as a skirmisher, but then you immediately get shot through your shield and be like, why have they not fixed this weapon? It's probably something that they can't fix within the game's engine or something like that at this point if they've spent so long with it still having these problems. It's just not super reliable as a main weapon that you can push in and take fights with. It's really dependent on its team to be able to get into position. Did another professional development about that. If you want more information, go and watch that. It was with Keen, a top North American Splatbrella player. Silver Arrow Spray. It's been my favorite punching bag even since Splatoon 2. This weapon is not good. It only paints, and what it's painting for is a reef slider. You cannot get by in this game with paint alone, especially when what you're painting for is a special that's not even that great. You know, at least with the reflux, you're getting missiles out of it. But with this, you're getting one of the worst specials in the game. Fizzy Bombs cannot save that. Fizzy Bombs are the only good part of that kit. If you're playing this, you're playing it to spam Fizzy Bombs. And you can spam Fizzy Bombs with this. This has Fizzy Bombs. And also has other things. So, yeah. Do not recommend. This clash is pretty bad. We talked about all the weaknesses of the main weapon when we talked about this. Very, very poor paint and very slow kill time most of the time. Pretty inconsistent kill time as well. You have to be able to hit direct to get it fast. But now, instead of having one of the better aggressive kits you can give the weapon, it has a curling bomb and super chumps, both of which are very underwhelming for it. Yes, the curling bomb is going to help it, you know, maneuver a little bit more, but what are you going to try and do to that? Like, run at someone with a curling bomb? With a Clash Blaster? Like, why not just use a Splat Roller if that's your entire game plan? Because this thing actually kills them quickly when you get close to them. And you don't have to get that much closer to them with the Splat Roller. In fact, you might even splat them from further away with a vertical flick. I'm not sure exactly what the range is on that. I think you have to get a little bit closer with this, but it's not by much. Definitely not worth picking this over this for. And then Super Chumps, like we've talked about, are pretty underwhelming right now. They need a significant buff to be seen at top level. But the Super Chump is probably the best part of this weapon's kit, which is saying something. Then Undercover Brella, I would say, is probably the worst weapon in the game right now. Again, Brella shields have some problems. This weapon also has very, very low DPS. It is hard to kill people with this thing, but it also doesn't keep itself alive anywhere near as long as the other Brellas do, assuming the Brella functions as expected, because the shield is made of tissue paper, and it just takes like a bomb to get rid of completely. So you'll step out and be like, hey, look, enemy team, fire at me instead of my teammates. And then they'll oblige. And then you'll be like, wait, my teammates weren't in position to try and attack you yet. I'm scared. And now you're just not a very useful weapon. You don't have anything you can poke with at long range because the longest ranged option you have is a Reef Slider, but that is a button that usually gets you splatted instead of actually doing anything. It's better now, but it's definitely not great. And Ink Mines don't give you any of that kind of reach. So A lot of the time, your best option is put an ink mine down at your feet and back up so that they get damaged by the ink mine, and you can try and combo off that. But the thing is, that means you're backing up. That means you're giving up space. You're not occupying the enemy team. You are being forced back as your default mode, which is the same problem that the Dualie Squelchers have. So, definitely do not recommend. All of these weapons are pretty darn weak, and they would need significant reworks for me to ever reconsider that. Okay, we did it! Yay! Tier list! Woo!